Then we started building internal tools for ourselves, things that are beneficial to creating a software business. And we started thinking about things a little bit differently still. So we're going broader. We started saying, we use GitHub to build GitHub because it's more products than just github.com. Things like, some things that you have seen, like the jobs site, jobs.github.com. Things like Gist, a bigger suite of products that can help you solve more problems. And now the final vision that we have now is what we call making it easier to work together than to work alone. You'll see that it's completely divorced from software altogether. And so I will actually answer your question, what are we going to do with that $100 million? It's that. How many people in the world use code? How many people in the world write code? 30 million, maybe. 40 if you're lucky. How many people are there in the world? There's a lot more room to fix collaboration than just software. But this took a long time to get to. We didn't start with this idea of fixing collaboration for the world. We started with the idea of getting a repository from your computer onto the internet. That was it. So remember that when you're solving a problem, pick something that you can solve. Hopefully there's a direction that you can go that becomes bigger, right? But choose something small in the beginning that you can actually solve. If you bootstrap like we did, and your product becomes popular, then you'll also be faced with a choice, which is, are we going to do this as a lifestyle business? Is our product going to be a lifestyle, very niche kind of thing? And yeah, it'll make your lives really good. You can live with that way. That's awesome. Lots of people do this. That's great. But you'll also be faced with a choice, which is, do we want to blow this out? Do we want to change to create a specific culture? The people that we hired created the culture. At some point, you might want to codify this culture that is inherently created through the people that you hire so that you can communicate it well. Let me briefly explain what, to me, the 5 core values of GitHub are. Number 1, optimizing for happiness. If you want to learn more about that, watch my talk from 2 years ago. Optimizing for happiness means think about what you're doing and how it's going to create more happiness in the world for your customers, for your team members, and for your shareholders. If you do options like most startups do, then your team members are also your shareholders. If you raise money, then your shareholders are part of that equation as well. If you do those things, if you optimize for happiness, my theory is that profits will result naturally. And it puts you on the right path to do things that matter. Number 2, best argument wins. This means that it's not about ego. It's not about who you are, where you came from. It's about making good arguments, backing them up, and being open to other people's arguments. This is critical to avoiding politics within a company. If you can argue about something that matters, and the argument is the thing and not the people behind it, then you can have good results, you can create good product, and you can avoid politics. Number 3, working from first principles. Everything that we do from scratch. You might think this is very inefficient. Sometimes it is. But we think through every problem that way because GitHub is a unique company. Just like every company is unique. You can't just take the ideas that work for some other company and apply them to yourself. And in fact, you can't take the ideas that I give you today or that anyone gives you today and just copy them and expect them to work for you. You have to think about what it means for your company. This is how you create something new, something better. Number 4, create superfans. Travis's talk about Uber and how they delight their users on certain holidays, giving them a motorcade. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. For us, we do drink ups. It's like a meetup, except it's at a bar and we buy you beer. For developers, this turns out to be incredibly effective. That's just one of many things, how we deal with support. What I love about our support team is that we measure our success, the success of a support interaction, by counting how many exclamation points are in the response from an end user. That's creating superfans, creating that kind of experience that goes above and beyond what is expected. And number 5, be awesome.
And I was in AdSense, not as an engineer, but working, basically doing customer support, taking feedback from users and feeding it back into the advertising products. The reason I was there was because I'd come from Washington, D.C., where I was working as a consultant. And growing up, even though I'd always looked up to anybody that made things, whether it was an architect or an engineer or an artist, I'd always kind of thought that I was going to be a doctor. And so I pursued that path, which is the same path my parents pursued, the same path that both of my sisters pursued. So when I graduated from college and decided I didn't want to be a doctor, I was a little bit lost. But even then, even at the time that I thought I was going to be a doctor, I had this real interest in technology. I thought it was really cool. So when I was an undergrad, I made a program with some friends that let you try on glasses online. And it was appropriate because both my parents were ophthalmologists. When I was at my consulting job in DC, a good friend of mine named Altai had me help him out with his YC startup where he was trying to help market bands. He was a musician in a band. And even when I moved out to California and I was at Google, I was working on another website, which was a quiz website that let anybody play quiz questions about anything they wanted. And the common theme through all these things was that for some reason I kept going back to the idea of building a product. I thought that was a really exciting thing to do, but it always stalled. And I always had an excuse for why it stalled. It wasn't the right market. I needed to learn more by working at Google. It wasn't the right timing. But actually, the dependent variable was just me, right? The dependent variable was that I never actually committed and put myself in a situation where I had to make it work. And so I think for me, I paid too much attention to talks where people basically built something huge on the side and they were pulled out of their job and everything was working. For me, at least, the act of committing to going out and doing it turned out to be a really important thing. And so I don't know if this applies to everyone. I've heard of a lot of people that have successfully built things on the side and then gently transition it into a full-time gig. But at least in my situation, for a person that really puts his heart into whatever job is at hand, it was a really important step. I actually remember the night that I made the call. I was sitting at dinner with my girlfriend then, now my wife, and I was talking about some cool idea that I think would be great and how we could build it and how we could market it. And she looked at me and said, you should either do it or just stop talking about it. And it was a little bit harsh, but honestly, it was the best thing someone could have told me because she was absolutely right. And I feel genuinely thankful that someone was honest enough in my life to just call me out and say, make it happen or don't make it happen, but just make your call and be happy with that call. And so I'm always really thankful for her giving me that advice. So I left in 2008 and I hooked up with one of my friends named Paul. He was a great friend from college, super driven guy. And we decided the thing we were really interested in was mobile. So the iPhone had come out recently and the platform had come out. And so people were really excited about it. And the product that we wanted to build was called Tote. It was a shopping catalog on the phone. And the reason I thought this would be so cool was that I got all these catalogs in the mail dumped on my doorstep and I had this brand new, really cool phone and I just wanted to see something running on this phone. And so we got to work and we started prototyping it. We did it out of savings, but there were some problems. The first was that it took a really long time to get things built and approved by Apple. A really long time back then. You had no idea when it was going to get approved. You had no idea what was going to happen. And second, there were a lot of unsolved problems back then. We had sort of these grand ideas of doing all sorts of offline caching, of being able to use this thing in the subway, of being able to eventually process payments. We put all those ideas into this prototype, and it made it really hard to ship. And not surprisingly, sooner or later, we were in a situation where we really needed to raise some money. And it was 2008, and you had 2 non-technical co-founders, and it was a really bleak time. There are lots of ways for investors to say no to you, and I'm pretty sure that I've heard all of them. I've heard every single one. These are the top 3. Number 1 is call me back in a few months. This is kind of the most painful. It's just you ask someone out on a date and they're like, not right now, but maybe in November, right? That one is really, really hard to hear because you're gonna have even less money and you're gonna even have less leverage in the negotiation. The second is who else is in, right? This is one that you hear all the time. It's it's not good enough for me by myself, but if there are other people that commit money, I'd be willing to consider it. And then there were the occasional people that were really blunt. They were just there's no way this is going to happen. This is insane. It's totally crazy. I remember really vividly, I went to a session where I was pitching actually a whole group of investors up on Silicon Valley. And it's really intimidating, right? You're looking and these people have built great companies. And I'm about 5 minutes into explaining what we're doing and everyone starts just like heading for the door. And I was like, man, like what am I doing wrong? And I found out they had brought a tray of free cookies. And what I was saying was interesting enough to keep them in their seats as long as they were like no cookies in the background. You know, we've done fundraising a few times, and sometimes it's been easier and sometimes it's been really, really hard. We've done it where we've flown to all the coasts, we've tracked down sort of everyone in our alumni directory, whether they were tech investors or not investors. We've done it a bunch, and I think I've learned like 3 important lessons that I think any entrepreneur should know if they're starting the kind of company they think will need funding. Myself amongst them actually really loved it. And instead of immediately changing the product, I was like, maybe I can just find more people like me. And that also fits with our current operating strategy since we don't have very good engineering resources. So we're just going to market this thing. And that's what we started to do. We started to have meetups. This is our first meetup in San Francisco. It was at a store called Rare Device. We did another meetup later at West Elm. It's a little bit later. We all became a lot easier to get things done. So where are we today? We live in San Francisco now. We just moved our office from Palo Alto. Sadly, I love Palo Alto. And we're building out a team of people that are really diverse. I mean, I think the thing that we learned in building the service was that our problem in distribution wasn't an engineering problem, it was a community problem. The problem in building the first really cool thing didn't happen to be anything but a design problem. And those 3 things just had to work together for our kind of business to succeed. When I came out of Google, I thought, man, the only way I can get this done is if I get the most brilliant graduate student out of Stanford who doesn't know that he's invented PageRank yet. There are a lot of different things that are successful for the very simple reason that there are a lot of different kinds of people in the world. And as much as people want to give you advice about exactly how you should run your startup, exactly the strategy, I think you need to trust the data, you need to trust the users that you have, and you need to trust your own instinct to do what you think is going to be right for your company. Pinterest right now is a tool where we help people find their inspiration. And to some people that sounds really hokey, but to me, the idea that we can show people things that they want to do in their future, help them get closer to actually doing those things, whether it's redecorating their home or going on a vacation or buying a gift, and in that process, inspire someone else, is a really cool thing to be working on. And it's not what we thought the site was going to do when we first launched it, but it's what it's come to be. And sometimes the product finds its purpose, and sometimes it goes the other way around. And either way is okay as long as you get to something that people really love. Pinterest is a network, right? We have millions of people that are connected through billions of objects. It's the 3rd largest source of referral traffic on the internet. And so in the early days when people are like, we don't need to be a technology company, now we have to, right? All of a sudden, now we need folks that can mine for data, and those people have really interesting things to do. Like we're on that road trip, like we're heading towards the Midwest, and it turns out we had to veer the other way. And I think that adaptability to change is really fundamental. And at the same time, Pinterest is a tool where people can do these things, right? You can plan a vacation, you can plan cooking and recipes, you can plan holiday shopping, you can plan all these things in your life. And the very last thing that's important to me is that Pinterest is a team of talented people. Like I feel genuinely lucky to like walk into the office and work with people that are better than me at pretty much everything I do. And I think that to me, even though there are a lot of stories told about entrepreneurs that toil alone, the best things in the world are made by groups of people. I think when you're really early on in a startup, you're really worried about, oh my gosh, like I can't give my equity to this person, it's gonna run out. But it's the size of the total pie, right? It's the size of how many people can you actually build something that's bigger than who they are. And if you can find those people, if you can find people that want to work with you on something that's bigger than they are, I think that it's the best investment that you can make, to give them ownership in what you're actually building. And to me, it's just been a really gratifying experience to know that everyone that works with us actually owns part of the fate of the company. So this is just people from around the office. We obviously value collaboration. It's kind of how the company was founded. And so if I had 2 pieces of advice, they're really, really simple. right? The first is that you should really just build something you believe in. If you're going to go on a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, 15-year journey, at least build something that you really, really love, because otherwise you're definitely going to burn out, right? You'd have to be like the most mercenary person to give themselves 15 years and take all this risk if you didn't at least love the idea of where you're going to end up. And the second is just don't give up. Don't let somebody talk you out of your dream. And the reason that I think startup school is so cool is because if you look around in the room, like you're surrounded by all these people that really want to do what you're doing. Silicon Valley is like a weird place. Like people always seem to be talking about doing startups, but people are from all over the country. They're from all over the world. And those early parts of doing a startup can actually be really lonely. It can just be a total bummer because you're toiling on this thing. No one cares about it. It's not getting anywhere. And there's a tendency, I think, with a lot of people that I meet are doing
Welcome, everybody.
Getting bigger.
Yeah, I hear you guys are too. Okay, so these are the questions that I was curious about, and I think they'll be the questions you guys are curious about too. I'm going to ask a lot about the very early days of Facebook. We were just talking about them in the back. It was fascinating. I sort of wish you could have heard it. We'll do our best to try and reproduce it. So here's a question that might be a little bit difficult. How long before 2004 could something like Facebook have succeeded? Like, what was the last thing that was needed to fall into place? Could someone have done it in 1995 or 2000?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. There were certain elements that we certainly bootstrapped off of and kind of used to hack early identity, right? So one of the things that people don't think about that often today is early on we wanted to establish this culture of real identity on the service. And there weren't really any other online services or communities where people were openly their real self before that. And one of the ways that we kind of determined that someone was really who they said they were and their credentials were real, where everyone had school email addresses. And I don't know how much before 2004, I assume, probably around 2000, all schools started issuing email addresses, but that was really this critical thing that made it so that we could get started. It was this counterintuitive thing that not many other services were using.
So school email addresses were the original source of identity.
Well, that's how we knew what school you were in.
Right, and that you weren't just a sock puppet. Because you can't...
Once we got to a few million people or 10 million people where that culture was established, it was able to bootstrap into something that was much bigger that kept most of that culture, even though now, obviously, most people in the world don't have emails that are issued by some institution that vouches for their identity.
Now people log in through Facebook. Now you're the source of identity.
Well, it comes around.
Yeah.
But to your question about when would it have been possible, one of the big trends that we see is that the amount that any individual shares in a given year seems to be growing at this exponentially increasing rate. Right?
Zuckerberg's law.
Yeah, I don't call it that, but other people do.
You heard it here first.
But I mean, it is this kind of social networking version of Moore's law, and it's interesting. And what that suggests to me is, if we expect that this rate is going to double every year, then look out 10 years. 2 to the 10th is 1024, right? So 10 years from now, people will be sharing about 1,000 times as many things. We'll have to get better adhesion next year.
I feel like everything will be cool anyway. I just have a good feeling about today. I don't think that's a bad omen.
No, that's wonderful. So I think the question is not would Facebook have not been possible before 2004. It would have been in some capacity, but people would have shared less. And if you fast forward 5 years, there's going to be a version of, there are going to be all these social services that people are using to share way more. And I think that anyone here can kind of think about, 10 years from now, people are going to be sharing 1,000 times as much stuff a day. If this trend continues, what things are going to have to exist in the world? What kind of services are going to have to exist in order for that to be possible?
Instagram for toilets. That's the final frontier.
I mean, Instagram is killing it. I mean, they're doing really well, so that's a good frontier.
All right, so when you first launched, in the very beginning, the features were sort of profile, with like a profile photo and your name and who you are, and also you included things like what house you lived in, what dorm you lived in, and what courses you were taking. Do you think it would have worked without that? Would it have been enough just to have profiles?
You know, it's a really interesting question. And we certainly since then have evolved and wanted to make a more general service, so we've dropped some of those things. But I remember there's this early debate that Dustin and I had where we had to do some manual work for every school that we released Facebook at. And in order to do that, we basically went through and we parsed the course catalogs of the schools to make sure that the data was clean. And I remember having this debate where Dustin